got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, description on one wire service, master criminal.
Dressed in a business suit demanding $200,000 and carrying a plain briefcase which he told the crew held explosives.
This is the man who pulled off the only successful skyjacking in U.S. history.
As far as we can tell, Kenny Christensen had one life before the hijacking and a completely different one afterwards.
It was the day before Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1971, when a well-dressed man carrying a briefcase boarded a Boeing 727 at Portland International Airport. The Northwest flight was scheduled to land in Seattle, Washington. The man booked his flight under the name Dan Cooper and calmly ordered a bourbon and soda before passing the flight attendant Florence Schaffner a note. The note said, "Miss, I have a bomb here and I would like you to sit by me."
Miss?
Yes, Mr. Cooper?
You might want to take a look at that note. I have a bomb.
Another flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, watched as Florence Schaffner went to sit next to the passenger in the last row. She noticed Florence motioning for her to pick up the note she dropped, and when she read it, she immediately notified the pilots, and at this time the FBI got involved. According to witnesses, he was a quiet man who appeared to be in his mid-40s, wearing a business suit with a black tie and white shirt. The man never referred to himself as DB, he called himself Dan, and the media is who came up with DB. When the FBI was asked where the media got the name, they basically said, where does the media get anything really?
When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper.
The crew had little to say.
We gave the information to the authorities, and we just don't want to discuss it any further.
Have you been told by the FBI not to discuss?
No, they handle their investigation, and my company would rather have it released through them.
Tina, were you with the rest of the crew during the flight after you left the ground the last time?
Yes, I went up to the cockpit.
None of you were within sight of the hijacker, right?
Right. We already talked about it, and the captain...
The hijacker demanded $200,000, 2 front parachutes, 2 back parachutes, and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. When the plane arrived at the Seattle-Tacoma airport, the FBI exchanged Cooper's demands for the passengers on board, aside from a few crew. Cooper then requested the pilots fly to Mexico City at an altitude of 10,000 feet or below. Any higher, the cabin would have to be pressurized. And he also wanted the flaps set at 15 degrees exactly, which meant the Boeing 727 could not fly any faster than 200 miles per hour. The only flight attendant left was Tina Mucklow, and he ordered her into the cockpit, so he was alone in the cabin. He made his way to the back of the plane and lowered the rear stairwell. 13 minutes later, the plane's gauges recorded a slight bump in the pressure, and it's assumed he jumped out then.
See you again someday.
The hijacker disappeared into the night and would not be heard from or seen again until 9 years later, when an 8-year-old boy and his dad were fishing on the shore of the Columbia River in Vancouver and found some of the money.
Right at the spot we're standing here, we've calculated that this is the precise location that Brian Ingram, when he was 8 years of age, scooped across the sand with his arm and uncovered the 3 bundles of bills, which have been the only Cooper cash ever recovered from that hijacking event in 1971.
We were out here making a campfire, my father and I. That's when we discovered the 3 packets of $20 bills, later to be proven as ransom money of D.B. Cooper.
Let me introduce you to Kenny Christensen. He was a Northwest Airlines flight attendant and D.B. Cooper,
in my opinion.
And the rest of the video is going to be me explaining why I think that.
This is a composite sketch from the eyewitnesses on the airplane. And this is
your brother. That's my brother.
All right, look at this.
Oh, man.
That's bizarre. Look at that.
Kenny Christensen was born on October 17, 1926 in Minnesota, and the FBI actually believes that the hijacker could have been from the Midwest because he had no discernible accent. According to Kenny's brother Lyle, they grew up on a farm, and as soon as Kenny graduated from high school, he enrolled in the military where he received paratrooper training. He actually was in a class that started with 262 men, and by the end there were only 80. He was one of them.
They had to train them to land in trees or water, anything. They could land in anything.
He spent 2 years in the Army and then applied for a job at Northwest Airlines and was sent to Shemia Island in Alaska, where he worked as a member of the maintenance team for 5 years. While on the island, Kenny also worked as a purser for the airline and would have been aware of Northwest policy at the time to comply with any demands made in the event of a hijacking. And on November 24, 1971, when the FBI reached out to the head of Northwest, they wanted to just pay the $200,000 and not try and negotiate. He kept in touch with his family by writing letters, and some of them indicated he wasn't too happy with the airline because they were actually referred to as Cobra Airlines because they had 8 labor strikes between 1954 and 1971. Being a part of the maintenance team, obviously when the planes are grounded, you're kind of out of a job. At the time of the hijacking in 1971, Kenny had become a flight attendant and was living in Sumner, Washington. He was making $512 a month working for Northwest. And 6 months after the hijacking, he paid $16,000 in cash for a house. Sumner, Washington is only about 45 minutes from Seattle, so if Kenny was the hijacker, it would make sense that he chose Seattle as the destination. He decided to jump out not long after they took off, which would give him a pretty good chance of at least landing in the general vicinity of where he lived.
How did you surmise that he was not on the plane when he landed in Reno?
Well, a search was made of the plane immediately after landing.
As we understood it, he could have gotten off as the plane taxied before it came up here. How did the crew know he wasn't on when it touched ground?
No way. The crew couldn't know that, but we at the airport covered
Are the authorities?
It's widely believed the alias Dan Cooper came from a French comic book series. The books followed a Canadian military pilot who went on adventures in a rocket ship. Not long before the hijacking, the comics released an edition featuring the main character parachuting on the cover, and most people believe the hijacker did serve in the military at some point, so he could have even been overseas, and these comics were only ever circulated in Europe and Canada. And Kenny was in the military, so it is definitely possible that he could have came across these comics at some point.
I found this picture in his photo book. I must have looked at the photo book many times and never caught it. And one day I said, wait a minute. Carrying a bag, looks like a bag of money, and he's got the attaché case.
The FBI's wanted poster shows the hijacker was a white male in his mid-40s, between 5'10" and 6 foot tall. He had no particular accent, and he was carrying a paper bag. In 1971, Kenny was 45 years old. He was 5'8", with brown eyes, dark hair, paratrooper training, knowledge of the airline's policies, and bought a house 6 months after with cash.
Chances, if it is Kenny Christensen, of getting on a plane and not being recognized by 2 of your fellow flight attendants?
If he flew strictly international routes, there wasn't much intermingling necessarily.
But pretty soon we heard that he was a purser flying to Tokyo.
Kenny's brother Lyle said that he used to wear a toupee before the hijacking and never wore it after. Kenny Christensen was never on the FBI's radar. When they were asked about him, they said he didn't match the witness descriptions, but he did. The only area he didn't match was the height description, and he was only off by 2 inches. And the FBI should know that witness accounts aren't reliable, but they also claimed it could not have been him because he was bald. Toupees were apparently also not on the FBI's radar. The History Channel's show Decoded has an episode about D.B. Cooper that is basically 45 minutes of circumstantial evidence against Kenny Christensen, so I will link that below. They actually went to the house that Kenny was living in after the hijacking and found something pretty interesting above his bedroom.
Whoa. Hey guys?
Yeah?
This is interesting. There is I just lifted up a piece of the floor and there is a little space down here where something absolutely could have been. It's almost like it's a little hiding space. And it's actually right above the bedroom.
That's right.
Where Kenny Christensen slept.
Yeah, this is
The house that Kenny bought has actually now been turned into a store called Priced Right Print and Sign, and the new owners discovered cash on the property.
When the owner I bought it from bulldozed all the trees around here, unknowingly unearthed some kind of a clear plastic bag, they said, that was ripped open from being dragged through the stumps probably. And the kids were playing in the stumps playing fort, and they found a bag and it had money in it.
There are tons of TV shows and movies that have scenes referencing D.B. Cooper, and there's also been entire songs written about him.
But a parachute and a few $100 is all that they've ever found.
To the possession of the duffel bag that belonged to Mr. D.B. Cooper?
The story is as follows. I was camping, all alone, by myself, just trying to get my head straight, enjoying some freeze-dried turkey loaf in God's country when boom, this guy comes parachuting out of the sky, lands on my pup tent, and asks me to give him a lift into town.
He wouldn't do it unless we were all together.
I swear to God, I think he figured it out. I mean, look at all this research. He reconstructed the jump. He pinpointed DB's landing.
That's crazy.
In 2016, the FBI called off the search for D.B. Cooper, saying that they had actually spent more money looking for him than he took, which I kind of find hilarious, and they would no longer be pursuing tips.
Well, I think it's a great mystery. What happened to this guy? The last thing we knew is he had $200,000 and bailed out of the back of a 727 November 24th, 1971. And then from there, we don't know.
Kenny passed away in 1994, but not long before he told his brother, quote, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." When he passed away and his family went through his belongings, they discovered he had over $186,000 in his bank account. While working on Chimia Island, Kenny met a man named Bernie Geestman, and they were lifelong friends. Before the hijacking, Kenny was actually renting a room from Bernie's wife.
Is that we're wondering if he is D.B. Cooper.
You're asking me my opinion?
Yes.
Yes. He looks exactly like the picture the FBI put out.
So you were suspicious right away, Bernie?
That looked like Kenny to you?
Yes.
Some believe the hijacker could have never survived the jump, but in April of 1972, Richard McCoy hijacked a United Airlines flight and jumped out from 16,000 feet going 200 miles per hour. Dan Cooper jumped out going 200 miles per hour at 10,000 feet, and Kenny had training on how to land in trees. He definitely made it. Kenny led a quiet life. He never made any extravagant purchases aside from paying cash for a house. And he actually continued to work for Northwest Airlines. To some, this may indicate that he could not have been the hijacker, but I think it actually would have been more suspicious if he just quit right after. As his friend said, he was doing international routes, so he would not have ever been in contact with that flight crew again. I truly believe that Kenny was D.B. Cooper. I think there's no facts that point away from him, and he was trained in how to jump and land in inclement weather and all types of terrain. He had access, he had unexplained spending, and I don't think the hijacker would have jumped unless he knew that he could survive. There's a story I'm going to be doing a video on soon of a boy who got away with even crazier shit than D.B. Cooper all before his 18th birthday. But if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe so that it will go out to more people, and I hope to see you next video.
As for me, I hope they never see DB Cooper